So now we learned about computed properties, a key feature for outputting dynamic values that depend on multiple input values, or, like in this case here, on one input value and one hard-coded value. There also is another reactivity feature built into Vue, and that would be watchers. Now, what are watchers? Well, a watcher is basically a function you can tell Vue to execute when one of its dependencies changed. Okay, that sounds just like computed properties, doesn't it? Well, indeed you can use watchers instead of computed properties, and here's how that would work and why you maybe don't want to do it. Let me add a full name data property here, like this, and therefore let's comment out this full name computed property so that we don't have a name clash. You don't want to use a computed and a data property with the same name. Now we can add a new configuration here, a new option to this object we passed to create app. Again, anywhere in there, position doesn't matter. I'll add it here. And that's the watch option. Just like data, computed, and methods, this name is not up to you. It's one of the supported features Vue has, and therefore this has to be watch. Watch wants an object, just like computed and methods. And in here, again, you'll define a bunch of methods. To be precise, here you can now use a name you used in a data or computed property as a name for a watcher method. So for example, here we could use name because we have that name data property and define it as a method here in watch. Technically, this is okay. We'll not have any name clashes here. This tells Vue one important thing. Whenever name changes, this watcher method will re-execute. And that's really important. This name here, being used here, sets up this connection. That's how watchers work. You repeat another data or computed property name in a watcher method as a method name there. And when you do that, that watcher method will be executed automatically by Vue whenever a property of that name, so in this case, whenever the name property changes. We could also watch the counter property instead, but here I want to watch the name. And then in here we can specify any logic we want. We don't return anything because we're not going to use the watcher anywhere in our HTML code to use a returned value. Instead, in here we can run logic that should be executed when the name changed. For example, we could update full name here and set it equal to this.name plus an empty space plus Schwarzmüller. Actually, we don't even need to refer to this.name here. A watcher function automatically gets the last value, the latest value of the watched property as an argument. So this is passed in automatically by Vue, this latest value of the watched property. Hence, we can accept it as an argument, name it however you want, and then use it in here. We actually also could accept a second argument here besides value, and that would then be the previous value. So the old value of the watched property. Here I'm just accepting one because we only need that one, but you could accept two arguments if you wanted to. New value and old value. And with that we would also update the full name whenever the name changes. If we save that and reload, indeed if I type here, you have the same behavior as before. With one difference, we always see Schwarzmüller here, but we could also change this. Check if value is empty is an empty string, and if that's the case, we set full name equal to an empty string as well. So that would be how we could ensure that full name is empty if value is empty. Actually, of course, I should then put the other code into an else block though, and now we have that described behavior. So that's a watcher, and as you see, you could use it as an alternative to a computed property. Now, we have a couple of problems if we use it for that though. For one, I would argue that the concept of a computed property is maybe a bit easier to understand. But the bigger problem arises if we have a computed property that would use more than one dependency. Let's say we have a second input. So I just duplicated my input here. And there we have a last name. Now we add a new data property, last name, which initially is an empty string. And this is bound with vModel on that second input. So now we have these two names. Now we want to update the full name whenever the name or the last name changed. To achieve this with a watcher, we need to add a second watcher because the first one simply watches the name. Now we need to add a second one where we also watch last name and get the value of that. And in here we have almost the same code, but we want to set the full name here equal to this.name plus blank plus last plus value, because here we get the latest value of last name. And up there in our first watcher, we want to change this to value plus blank plus this last name, because we're watching name here. So now we have two watchers to reflect the full name, which is managed with two inputs. And yes, this works, but it's a lot of code, especially if we compare it to the computed property alternative. Let me comment out the full name data property. And let's also comment out the watchers. We could remove them, but I'll keep them around for reference. And let's bring back the computed property to see how much easier it is with a computed property. There, if we want to use two dependencies, we simply reference two dependencies, like this, pointing at this last name. And now we got the desired behavior with less code. Maybe we should also tweak the if check here and check if the name is empty or this last name is empty. If either of the two is empty, we return an empty full name. But with that, we got the desired behavior, and it's really not a lot of code. It's just this code to get a full name dynamically. Compare that to our two watchers. So why do we have watchers then if we can use them but they're worse? Because this works but is not the main scenario for using watchers. Watchers are powerful if you have a different kind of intent in mind. Let's come back to our counter here. Let's say when the counter exceeds 50, anything like that, we want to reset it. That's the type of task where a watcher shines. We want to change counter when something happens. So we can watch counter and get its latest value to then check if value, so the value of the counter, is greater than 50. And if that's the case, we set this counter equal to 0. That's the kind of thing where watchers can be helpful. If you want to run logic that maybe also updates a data property, but which shouldn't always do that, for example. Here, I only want to set the counter to 0 if we exceed 50. A computed property would probably not be the best alternative here for this kind of task. You can try solving this with a computed property and you'll quickly see that you'll face some problems here. With a watcher, this is easy though. If we save that and now reload, we can change the counter, but you'll see if I press add 10 again, and hence we would exceed 50, it's back to 0 and starts again. So that's the kind of task where a watcher can shine. Another example would be HTTP requests which you want to send if certain data changes, or timers which you want to set if certain values change. For example, here we could say if value exceeds 50, I want to set a timer to 2 seconds, and in the function that executes after the 2 seconds, I want to reset the counter. Like this, that won't work though, because this in here won't refer to the same thing this would refer to outside of this function, and therefore we can work around that by storing this in another constant and using that here. That's nothing view specific, that's just how JavaScript works. The this keyword can be tricky there. But with that code, if I reload, if I ramp up the timer, it goes above 50, but it's reset eventually. Because we set a timeout every time the counter changes and is greater than 50. That's, by the way, also why it resets multiple times here, because if I exceed 50 and I keep on going, I trigger more and more watcher executions and more timers get set. So that's the kind of task where a watcher can be useful. If you want to run some code which maybe, but not necessarily, also updates some data property in reaction to a property changing. If you want to do that, execute code because something changed, then watchers can be helpful. If you just want to calculate some output value dynamically, computed properties are your friend.